In the grand tapestry of American history, there are stories of triumph and stories of tragedy. But few tales blur the line between the two as hauntingly as the legend of the Winchester Mystery House. Today, it stands as a chaotic labyrinth in the heart of San Jose, California. A tourist attraction filled with stairs to nowhere and doors that open into empty space. But to understand this house, we must look beyond its bizarre architecture. We must go back to a time when smoke and steel defined the destiny of a nation. The story begins not with a woman, but with a weapon, the Winchester Model 1873. Historians call it the gun that won the West, a romantic title for a machine designed with cold, industrial efficiency. Before its invention, the American frontier was a place where survival often depended on how fast you could reload a single-shot musket. But the Winchester changed the mathematics of death. It was a repeating rifle, a lever-action marvel that allowed a single man to unleash a hail of lead without ever taking his eye off the target. It could hold 15 rounds of ammunition. It was durable, reliable, and deadly accurate. It became the tool of choice for the US cavalry, for settlers pushing westward, and for outlaws carving their names into legend. It was the weapon that decimated the buffalo herds, leaving the Great Plains littered with bones. It was the weapon that broke the resistance of the Native American tribes, ending a way of life that had existed for centuries. And for every bullet fired, for every life taken on the dusty plains, a coin dropped into the coffers of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. This immense fortune, built on gunpowder and blood, would eventually find its way into the hands of one woman. Her name was Sarah Lockwood Pardee, and she would become the prisoner of her own inheritance. Sarah was born in 1839 in New Haven, Connecticut, into a world of comfort and culture. History often paints her as a mad woman, a trembling recluse hiding from demons. But the real Sarah was brilliant, vibrant, and undeniably gifted. Known as the Belle of New Haven, she was a woman of diminutive stature, standing barely 4 feet 10 inches tall. But what she lacked in height, she made up for in intellect. She was a child prodigy who mastered 4 languages: French, Spanish, Italian, and Latin. She possessed a mathematical mind that saw patterns where others saw chaos, a skill that would later define the complex geometry of her mansion. She was also a musical virtuoso, playing the piano with a grace that captivated anyone who heard her. In 1862, at the height of the American Civil War, she married William Wirt Winchester. He was the only son of Oliver Winchester, the founder of the rifle empire. It was the union of beauty and power, a marriage that promised a life of limitless luxury. For a time, their life was a fairy tale. They moved in the highest circles of New England society. But the universe has a cruel way of balancing the scales. For every blessing, a price must be paid. The first crack in their perfect world appeared in 1866. Sarah gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Annie Pardee Winchester. She was a child born into a cradle of gold, surrounded by the finest things the world could offer. But wealth is no shield against biology. Just 6 weeks after her birth, Annie fell ill. The diagnosis was marasmus, a severe form of malnutrition where the body simply fails to absorb nutrients. Sarah watched, helpless and terrified, as her precious daughter faded away before her eyes, starving to death, in a home filled with plenty. When Annie died, something inside Sarah shattered. A part of her soul was buried in that tiny coffin. Witnesses from the time reported that Sarah refused to let go of the body for days, rocking the empty cradle in a darkened room. She hovered on the brink of insanity, drowning in a grief so profound it terrified those around her. She would never have another child. The nursery would remain silent forever. For a decade, she walked through life like a ghost, a shadow in her own home, clinging to her husband William for support. But fate was not finished with the House of Winchester. In 1881, tragedy struck again. William, the love of her life, contracted tuberculosis. Despite the best doctors money could buy, he passed away at the age of 43. In an instant, Sarah was alone. The belle of New Haven was now a childless widow. She inherited a fortune of $20 million. In today's currency, that is worth over $500 million. She also inherited a 50% stake in the Winchester Company, granting her an income of $1,000 a day. Imagine that. $30,000 a day, tax-free, pouring into her accounts. But money cannot bandage a bleeding soul. Sarah was rich beyond dreams, yet she was arguably the poorest woman on earth. We must remember the context of the era. This was the Gilded Age, but it was also the age of spiritualism. The Civil War had left deep scars on the American psyche. Almost every family had lost a son, a father, or a husband. Desperate for connection, people turned to mediums and seances, hoping to pierce the veil between the living and the dead. It was in this atmosphere of mourning that Sarah traveled to Boston. Legend tells us she sought the counsel of a renowned spirit medium, a man who claimed he could hear the voices of the beyond. The atmosphere of the seance room was thick with incense and anticipation. The medium went into a trance. He claimed to see William standing beside her, but the message from her husband was not one of comfort. It was a warning, a terrifying prophecy. The medium told her, "Sarah, there is blood on your money. The spirits of the thousands of men, women, and warriors killed by the Winchester rifle are seeking vengeance. They have taken your daughter. They have taken me, and now they are hunting you." Trembling, Sarah asked for salvation. "What must I do?" The reply would dictate the rest of her existence. "You must go west," the medium said, "towards the setting sun. You must build a home, not for yourself, but for them, for the spirits. And you must never stop building. If the sound of the hammers ceases, even for a moment, you will die." Was this the manipulation of a charlatan preying on a grieving widow, or was it a genuine message? To Sarah, it didn't matter. She believed it with every fiber of her being. In 1884, Sarah Winchester packed her bags and turned her back on her life in the East. She traveled across the continent to the Santa Clara Valley in California. At the time, this was not the Silicon Valley of technology and glass towers. It was a land of orchards, apricots, and rolling fog. She purchased an unfinished 8-room farmhouse on a large plot of land. And then she began to build. She hired local carpenters, stonemasons, and gardeners. She paid them wages far above the standard rate. But she had one condition. We work around the clock, shifts of men, day and night, forever. And so, the farmhouse began to mutate. It grew outwards, swallowing barns and water towers. It grew upwards, reaching 7 stories into the sky. Sarah had no master plan, no architectural blueprints, no professional architect guided her hand. Each morning, she would meet with her foreman. She would sketch her visions on napkins, on envelopes, on scraps of paper. "Build a room here," she would order. "Add a wing there." If a room did not please her, she would not tear it down. She would simply build another room around it. Encasing it like a tomb, the house became a physical manifestation of a chaotic, grieving mind. For 38 years, the air around the estate was filled with a cacophony of industry. The rhythmic pounding of hammers, the screech of saws cutting through redwood, the shouting of workmen. It was a symphony of construction that never paused for breath. Let us walk through the corridors of what she created. It is a disorienting experience, an assault on logic and reason. There are staircases that rise steeply, only to crash into a solid ceiling. There are doors that open, not into rooms, but into sheer drops. A 2-story fall into the gardens below. There are cupboards that are barely an inch deep. There are windows installed in the floor, looking down into the darkness of the basement. Why? Why create such madness? The popular theory is simple. She was trying to confuse the ghosts. She believed that if a vengeful spirit chased her, it would get lost in the maze. It would become trapped in the dead ends, baffled by the twisting corridors. She was playing a high-stakes game of cat and mouse with the afterlife. But looking closer, we see the obsession of a brilliant, tortured mind. Sarah was fascinated, perhaps obsessed, with the number 13. It is woven into the very fabric of the house, like a magical sigil. There are chandeliers with 13 candles, windows with 13 panes of colored glass. The greenhouse has 13 cupolas. Even the drain covers in the sinks were custom made to have 13 holes. Was this a ward against evil? Or was it Sarah trying to impose a numerical order on a world that had taken everything from her? However, not everything in the house is madness. Some of it is pure genius masked as eccentricity. Take the famous switchback staircase. It is a bizarre structure with 7 turns and 44 steps. Yet it only rises 9 feet. Each step is merely 2 inches high. To a healthy person, it feels ridiculous to climb, but historians offer a simpler, sadder explanation. Sarah suffered from debilitating rheumatoid arthritis. Her hands were gnarly, her joints inflamed. As she aged, she could barely lift her feet. These strange stairs were not built to trick ghosts. They were built for a woman in agony, trying to move through her massive kingdom without pain. The house was also a marvel of modern technology. Sarah installed push-button gas lights, wool insulation, and a sophisticated hydraulic elevator. Luxuries almost unheard of at the time, she was an innovator trapped in a ghost story. But even with scientific explanations, there are rooms that defy all reason. Deep within the heart of the mansion lies the Blue Room. This was the inner sanctum. Only Sarah held the key. The servants whispered about this room. They claimed that every night, when the clock tower struck midnight, a bell would toll. Sarah would emerge from her quarters, a tiny figure in black silk. She would enter the Blue Room and lock the door behind her. For 2 hours, she would sit in absolute silence. Was she reviewing blueprints, or was she communing with the spirits? Legend says she would ask the good spirits for guidance on what to build next, to appease the bad spirits that hunted her. At 2 a.m., the bell would toll again, and she would retreat to her bedroom, but never the same bedroom. She slept in a different room every night, rotating through the house. She never stayed in one place long enough for a spirit to find her. Imagine the isolation, imagine the paranoia, living in a palace of your own creation, yet feeling like a fugitive in your own home. Her eccentricities extended beyond architecture. She became a total recluse. She wore a dark veil at all times, shielding her face from the world. She refused to see neighbors. She refused to see family. But her fame was so great that even the most powerful man in America wanted to meet her, President Teddy Roosevelt. The story goes that Roosevelt visited San Jose and was fascinated by the tales of the Winchester house. He rode his carriage to her front gate and knocked on the door. He expected to be welcomed. After all, he was the President of the United States. But Sarah Winchester did not care for titles. She sent her gardener to the gate with a simple message. "Mrs. Winchester is not receiving guests today," and she turned him away. The doors of the mystery house remained closed. Even to the leader of the free world, this was her kingdom, and inside these walls, she was the only law. By the spring of 1906, the house was a titan. It stood 7 stories tall, a chaotic jumble of Victorian ambition dominating the landscape. But nature is the ultimate leveler. In the early pre-dawn hours of April 18th, the San Andreas Fault ruptured. The great San Francisco earthquake unleashed its fury on the coast. The ground rolled like the ocean in a storm. The massive 7-story tower of the Winchester house swayed, groaned, and then snapped. It collapsed into the gardens below, crushing rooms and corridors instantly. Inside, Sarah was sleeping in the Daisy bedroom. The violence of the quake shifted the walls, jamming the doorframe tight. She was trapped, buried alive in the dark. In her own creation, she screamed for her servants, but the house was so complex, so labyrinthine, that they could not find her. It took hours of digging and prying before they could liberate her from the rubble. When she emerged, shaken and terrified, she looked at the ruins of her beloved tower. Most people saw a geological event. Sarah saw a message, a divine rebuke. She believed the spirits were angry because she had spent too much time beautifying the front of the house. She had become vain. She had forgotten her mission. She ordered the workers to board up the entire front section. She did not repair the damage. She simply sealed it off. "We will never open these doors again," she whispered. And for the rest of her life, they remained sealed, a scar on the face of the mansion, rotting away in silence. Sarah lived for another 16 years after the earthquake, but the pace of construction slowed. Her eyesight failed. Her body grew frail. She spent her final years drifting through the rooms like a living ghost, tended to by loyal servants who protected her secrets. On September the 5th, 1922, Sarah Winchester passed away in her sleep. She was 83 years old, and at the exact moment of her death, something extraordinary happened. The hammers stopped. For the first time in 38 years, the air over the Santa Clara Valley was silent. The sudden absence of noise must have been deafening to the locals. The carpenters put down their tools immediately. Some left nails halfway driven into the wood. You can still see them today, frozen in time. An unfinished sentence at the end of a long, chaotic story. When the executors of her estate arrived, they were eager to uncover the secrets of the Winchester fortune. They found a massive safe in Sarah's office, hidden behind paneling. Rumors swirled that it contained solid gold bars, the family jewels, or the deeds to the company. They cracked the seal. The heavy iron door swung open with a groan, and inside, there was nothing of monetary value. There were only 2 items: a lock of baby hair, cut from the head of her daughter, Annie, and the obituary of her husband, William. It was the only treasure that ever truly mattered to her. All the millions, all the rooms, all the noise, meant nothing compared to the memory of those she had lost. Today, the Winchester Mystery House stands as a national historic landmark. Millions of tourists walk its bizarre corridors every year. They peer into the mirrors, listen for the creak of floorboards, and hope to catch a glimpse of a ghost. But perhaps we are looking for the wrong thing. Was Sarah Winchester truly haunted by the spirits of the dead? Or was she haunted by the crushing silence of an empty nursery? Was she building a trap for demons? Or was she simply building a distraction for herself? A way to fill the empty hours, a way to give purpose to a life that had lost its meaning. As you walk through the doors that lead nowhere, remember this: this house is not a monument to fear. It is a monument to grief. It is a labyrinth of wood and stone, built by a woman who tried to build her way out of a broken heart. But despite 38 years of hammering, she never found the exit.